Geometry is learned at the primary level as visual geometry without deductive elements. Primary school students become familiar with geometry through visual images or visual aids, real objects. Teachers are not necessarily required to ask students to deduce. Spatial orientation, relative positions of objects such as above or below, left or right, in front or behind, in the middle or not in the middle are reintroduced in the primary school mathematics curriculum from grade 1. Points are considered basic geometric objects and are introduced from grade 2. Regarding the relative position of 3 points, grade 2 students need to recognize 3 collinear points, and grade 3 students need to identify the middle point, the midpoint of a line segment. In addition to familiar shapes in previous primary school math programs such as line segments, zigzag lines, circles, the 2018 mathematics curriculum introduces curves. In fact, a circle is a special closed curve that students can use a compass to draw from grade 3. Corresponding to line segments, zigzag line, curves, circles, students will need to learn about the quantity of length and length measurement. The symbol for length is formed through activities of comparison, recognizing longer, shorter, recognizing units of length, measuring length with a ruler with markings, and estimating length from grade 1. A straight line and a line segment are both defined by 2 distinct points, but a line segment is limited to 2 endpoints, while a straight line is infinitely long and not bounded. A straight line is introduced in grade 2, serving as a prerequisite for recognizing collinear points. 2 distinct lines in a plane can either be parallel or intersect, with perpendicular being a special case when they intersect. 4th grade students need to recognize and be able to draw 2 parallel lines, 2 perpendicular lines using a straightedge and a set square. An angle is defined by 3 distinct points. 3rd grade students need to recognize angles, right angles, and use a set square to check and draw right angles. The term non-right angle appears from grade 3 and is specifically classified into acute angles, obtuse angles, and straight angles in grade 4. Corresponding to angles, 4th grade students learn about the quantity of angle measurement, using a protractor to measure angles with the unit of degrees, primarily measuring special angles like 60 degrees, 90 degrees, 120 degrees, and 180 degrees. Triangles and special quadrilaterals such as squares, rectangles, rhombuses, parallelograms, and trapezoids are familiar polygons in the primary school mathematics curriculum. Each polygon can be viewed as a closed zigzag line. The circle is also a familiar geometric object in the primary school math curriculum. Typically, polygons and circles are taught in 2 stages during primary school. Stage 1 includes grades 1 and 2, where students only need to recognize shapes in personal learning tools or real objects and engage in activities such as assembling and stacking shapes. Stage 2 comprises grades 3, 4, and 5. During this stage, students identify some basic elements of shapes, such as vertices, edges, angles of polygons, and the center, radius, and diameter of a circle. In Stage 2, students should explore the characteristics of shapes when performing tasks related to shape recognition, drawing, measurement, etc. Corresponding to polygons, circles, students need to learn about the quantities of perimeter and area. These geometric quantities often have rules and formulas calculated from the lengths of the sides rather than directly using measuring tools. For example, the perimeter of a polygon is calculated by adding the lengths of its edges, and the area of a rectangle is calculated by multiplying its length and width. Length measurements need to be converted to the same unit before performing calculations. In the 2018 mathematics curriculum, solid figures are introduced earlier. In stages 1 and 2, grades 1 and 2, students only need to recognize rectangular prisms, cubes, cylinders, and spheres in personal learning tools or real objects and engage in activities such as assembling and stacking shapes. In Stage 2, from grade 3 onward, students need to identify some basic elements of shapes, such as vertices, edges, faces, and characteristics of the solid figure. Understanding the characteristics and development of solid figures is the foundation for establishing rules for calculating surface area, total surface area, and volume of the solid. Thus, corresponding to geometric objects, primary school students learn to measure geometric quantities. Specifically, students learn to measure length and perimeter, mainly the length of line segments, length of zigzag lines, perimeter of triangles, perimeter of quadrilaterals, perimeter of rectangles, perimeter of squares, and perimeter of circles. Students learn to measure angle measures, mainly special angles like 60 degrees, 90 degrees, 120 degrees, and 180 degrees. Students learn to measure area, mainly the area of rectangles, area of squares, area of triangles, area of trapezoids, area of circles, surface area and total area of rectangular prisms, surface area and total area of cubes. Students learn to measure volume, mainly the volume of rectangular prisms and the volume of cubes. When organizing activities for students to measure real-world objects, we can refer to length, perimeter, area, and volume as physical quantities, where length is one of the 7 fundamental quantities, while area and volume are derived quantities. Capacity is a special type of volume, indicating the amount of space an object can hold. For example, the capacity of a water jug represents the maximum volume of water it can contain. Students become familiar with capacity from the 2nd grade. Mass is also one of the 7 fundamental physical quantities. From the 2nd grade, symbols for mass are introduced through activities involving comparison, recognizing heavier or lighter understanding units for measuring mass, and measuring mass using various common scales. Temperature is another one of the 7 fundamental physical quantities. Students learn to measure temperature in the 3rd grade. Time is also one of the 7 fundamental physical quantities. 2 common time measurement tools are the calendar and the clock, introduced from the 1st grade. With the calendar, 1st grade students need to recognize and determine the day of the week. 2nd grade students need to recognize the day of the month. 3rd grade students need to recognize the month of the year. With the clock, 1st grade students need to recognize the correct time. 2nd grade students need to understand the relationship between days and hours, hours and minutes, and read the time when the minute hand points to 3 and 6. 3rd grade students need to read the time on the clock accurately down to each minute. Units of time that are too short or too long, such as seconds, centuries, and the relationships between these units, are introduced and organized in the 4th grade. Speed is a derived quantity that can be determined from the length of, distance and time. 5th grade students only need to recognize the speed of uniform motion with units of meters per second, kilometers per hour, and meters per second squared. Students learn about the denominations of Vietnamese currency from the 2nd grade, corresponding to the range of natural numbers. This is a practical content for daily life. Teachers can organize games related to buying, selling, exchanging goods, and currency to make learning enjoyable and reinforce mathematical knowledge or solve problems arising in real-life situations. The common types of tasks and exercise formats encountered when teaching geometry and measurement include: identify, draw, create shapes, assemble, arrange shapes. Read, write measurements. Estimate, determine measurements. Convert units of measurement. Calculate with measurements.